Our guest tonight is a creative thinker, a compelling writer, and a good friend, Arthur Brooks, and I'm delighted to welcome him here. Arthur is the president of the American Enterprise Institute, where he is the Beth and Ravenel Curry Scholar in Free Enterprise. Arthur is really many people in one. He has a PhD in policy analysis and has done the sort of research that implies, but he has also been a professional musician, and he writes books with titles that include words like care and heart and happiness, which is not so common among people with PhDs in any field. Arthur is one of our country's most interesting and prominent public intellectuals. I hope you read his columns in the New York Times. If you don't, just to give you a sense of his breadth and perspective, I'll note titles of a few recent columns. One was Depressed by Politics, Just Let Go. Another was To Make the World Better, Think Small. Another was Behind Our Anxiety, The Fear of Being Unneeded, which he wrote together with the Dalai Lama. Arthur and I have interacted on a number of different ways over the years. When I was director of the Congressional Budget Office, Arthur kindly invited me to events at AEI. Arthur's been the president of AEI for more than 8 years, and when I became dean here, he graciously shared with me many of his insights on leading an organization of scholars and practitioners devoted to public policy, and I'm trying to put some of those ideas into practice here. AEI is also an indispensable collaborator with our Institute of Politics in our program for new members of Congress, which has gone on for a number of rounds, but this year in particular, we have expanded from a one-off training session to an ongoing set of interactions that AEI is hosting in Washington. So their partnership in this important work means a great deal to us, and I hope to the members of Congress, and we're all trying to help. Tonight's event is called Living Life Like a Startup, Learning Entrepreneurship at the Margins of Society. The event is sponsored by the Institute of Politics and the Malcolm Weiner Center for Social Policy. After Arthur makes his remarks, we'll have a discussion that will be led by our very own Leah Wright Rigueur. Leah is assistant professor of public policy at the Kennedy School. She is an impressive historian, and her courses, her professional writing, and her commentary on current events draw importantly on historical context. She teaches courses on race and public policy in modern America. The book you ought to read if you haven't from her is called The Loneliness of the Black Republican, Pragmatic Politics and the Pursuit of Power. It covers the ideas and actions of Black Republican activists, officials, and practitioners over more than 4 decades. And there are other books coming out, which maybe she can tell us about if she'd like. In any event, I'm grateful very much to Arthur for coming tonight, to Leah for agreeing to moderate this discussion. Arthur, the podium is yours. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. It's great to be here. It's great to see so many of my friends here at the Kennedy School. David Elwood and I have been working together for more than a year, and Greg Mankiw is here as well. He's been off and on involved with AEI over the years, and it's an honor to be here. I've been looking forward to this for ever since I was invited to do it. I want to talk to you today about entrepreneurship, but I want to do it in a different way than you probably heard it. Now, you heard that I have kind of an unusual background for somebody who taught in academia. I was a professor at the Maxwell School at Syracuse University for a long time. And then I'm the president of AEI. The unusual thing is that I made my living as a professional French horn player for a long time. For 12 years in the United States and in Europe, I played in symphony orchestras. I played for a couple of years with a jazz guitar player named Charlie Bird on the road. I did, it's an unusual way to get to be, up here, quite frankly. And people often ask me, what do these things have in common? And I often ask myself that as well. I mean, cultures do come, they kind of clash at times. A couple of years ago, I had an experience that sort of sums it up. We have an annual dinner in Washington, D.C., my institution, AEI, which is a big think tank in downtown Washington. And we have a black tie dinner for 2,000 people at the National Building Museum. It's a big event. It's hard to run. We have distinguished guests. And a couple of years ago, our guest of honor was Benjamin Netanyahu, protesters and fans. And it was a really controversial thing, and it went great. It was super fun and interesting. And afterward, people were filing out, and I was feeling pretty good about how it went. And the band started packing up. We'd hired a band. And the drummer is putting his drums away, and he comes down off the bandstand. He comes walking up to me, and he says, "Are you Arthur Brooks, the French horn player?" And I said, "Yeah." And I recognized him. It was a guy I made 2 records with in the 80s. And I said, "Hey, wow, it's been 25 years since I've seen you." And he says, "Are you the boss of all this now?" And I said, yes, I am. And then he looks at me and he says, "What happened to you, man?" And why do I bring that up? Because success is a funny thing, and it's pretty subjective, isn't it? He couldn't believe that I had walked away from a successful career. It was bizarre to him that I would do something, I would put on a tux and be the president of a think tank when I'd had a good career as a professional French horn player. Success is something that resides in our own hearts, and it got me thinking, what does it mean to me? What does it mean to you? And do we have the role models of success that really exhibit our values? I think that we don't in public policy. I don't think that we do in business either. And I'm going to make the case that we need to look at different people if we want to give the embodiment of success that reflects our values. That's my point tonight. And furthermore, if I do my job in the next 25 minutes, you're going to get some ideas that have helped me, and they might actually help you in understanding your own trajectory of success as well. So these are pretty lofty goals. Let's see. Now, when I taught at Maxwell, I taught a class called Social Entrepreneurship. It was a class that I created, and I taught it in the business school, but we had the Maxwell students and the business students. And one of the things that I always did, I used a lot of case studies of successful entrepreneurs, commercial entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs. And the way that I did, I like to, I did what everybody does. You take famous people who've been unbelievably successful as entrepreneurs and talk about their lives. What do they have in common? So Thomas Edison and Henry Ford and Andrew Carnegie, all the way up to Steve Jobs. Looking at these entrepreneurs. These are the successful entrepreneurs. This gets people's attention. But I got to tell you, I was never happy and comfortable doing that. I never, and I'll tell you why. I never liked doing that. 2 reasons, actually. The first is that there aren't very many of them, and so they're hard to emulate. Why give people examples of success that they can't attain? There's the great polling company, the Gallup polling organization. You see their stuff when they're predicting political races, et cetera, but that's not how they make their money. The company makes their money through a thing called the Strengths Finder survey. It's a survey in which you can sign up for it, pay a couple of bucks, or if you're a company, you can pay millions of dollars, and they'll come to your company, and they'll assess everybody's personality to find their strengths, what you're good at. And then you can align people's jobs with their strengths, and sort of 1,000 flowers bloom. That's the idea, right? So I was looking at the Gallup Strengths Finder, and what you find is that there's a particular entrepreneurial personality, right? Personality type out there. It's only 2% of the population. I don't want to hear that. Why? Because it gets to the point that all the role models I'm showing to these people are kind of unattainable. It's not helpful for me to go to my master's students and say, I've found the entrepreneurial personality type. You don't have it. I mean, that's unhelpful to students. It's not motivating to students. It's not very many. But here's the bigger problem. People who are entrepreneurial, who are the great entrepreneurs, the most successful people of the day, they tend to not be normal in some pretty alarming ways. There's a psychiatry professor at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. His name is John Gartner, and he does personality assessments. I think we might have a conflicting event going on here. He does personality assessments of successful entrepreneurs, and what does he find? He finds that they have high energy, tons of ideas, but they also have bad family relationships, and they tend to be impulsive, and they tend to be obnoxious, they tend to be hard to be around. That doesn't sound like success to me. That doesn't sound like what I want to be as a person. If I can't aspire to this, why would I call that success? So I stopped doing that. I stopped using these role models. I didn't use any role models at all for a long time until something happened, until I had an experience. that changed my point of view about who the real role models are. And let me tell you about it because it's really, really on my mind these days. About a year ago, I was working with a program in Houston called the Prison Entrepreneurship Program. Now, why am I doing this in Houston? Because at AEI, as a think tank, AEI is an academic institution. It's very easy to be in the ivory tower about ideas, but look, you know, you're in the public policy game, so am I, or nonprofit management, just like me. If it doesn't touch people and change their lives, don't do it. It's a waste of time. It's wasting everybody's time. So I want to know how our ideas actually go down to the base level and touch people's lives. And the only way I can do that, to know if my ideas work, is to go talk to people in the field and look at their faces and see them, see how their lives are changing. So I'm always in the hunt for the most successful social programs all over the country. You know, homelessness programs, criminal justice reform program, whatever. And there's this thing in Houston, the Prison Entrepreneurship Program, that's astonishing in its effectiveness. You know, in America in general, and again, they've identified this huge problem, which is that we have 23 million people in this country that are walking around who have been in prison, who are utterly at risk. 50% of them are reincarcerated within their first 2 years. This is one of the real tragedies in American life. Not that so many people have gone to prison for crimes, which is bad enough, but when they get out, they have a 50% likelihood, if they've been incarcerated for felonies, of going back to prison within 2 years. And second of all, those who are not in prison have a 70% unemployment rate. It's a huge problem for communities, it's a huge problem for individuals, for flourishing. It's unsustainable and hugely problematic. So I went to this place in Houston because they have a solution, they say. And that is to, in the Texas penitentiary system, to select about 2,500 guys a year. They'd like to do more, but this is what they can with their budget. And have them put together a business that they're going to start when they get out. It gives them a higher likelihood of work. Look, if you can't get a job, make your job. Furthermore, it gives them a sense of purpose. And does it work? 50% of guys, I told you, have a reincarceration rate, 50% within 2 years. Theirs is 7%. Okay? 1/7 as many people are going to prison within the first 2 years as in the general prison population. So I got to see what they're doing right. So I go down to Houston. I've got a film crew. We're making a documentary film about this all along the way. And it's kind of astonishing. You see these guys who are in their last year of prison, and they're in jumpsuits, and they're tattooed, and they look tough. And they're talking about the businesses that they want to start. And these are not, you know, large molecule biologic drugs and software firms. No. This is like barbecue joints and landscaping firms and the stuff that these guys knew how to do and they want to do. And they have it sort of written on their hearts. They say, I want to do this, right? And they do elevator pitches, and they talk about their budgets, and they talk about putting together their board of directors, and they learn how to do this. And it's amazing, right? And I thought, boy, they're so successful, they must all start their businesses. So at this critical juncture, I asked the guy who's running this program, how many of these guys actually start their businesses? It must be like 90 or 95% given their success. 16% start their businesses. 84% don't. And I said, this doesn't make sense. That sounds like a failure. So then I start talking to the guys, and I learn what I was missing. I asked them about startup businesses, and they talked to me about startup lives. They talked to me like entrepreneurs about their ordinary lives. They talk about being proactive. They talk about understanding the consequences of their actions, about trying new things as regards the lives of their children, and re-engaging with the mothers of their children, and taking ordinary jobs. I was looking for startup businesses. I found startup lives. And that was a huge insight to me. Why? Because that's us. I'm going to get back to that here in a second. I can't relate to Thomas Edison, but I can relate to somebody who started out with nothing, and some of you can too. All of us can relate to people who've started at the zero line. Those are the people that should give us the best examples of entrepreneurial behavior, and they're all around us. Now, I got super interested in this. I'm kind of obsessed with it, as a matter of fact, because I wanted to figure out what actually is their secret to success. And I'm writing a book now called The Startup Life. And it's completely capturing my imagination right now. It's going to have the 30 or 40 things that they all do. And why is it so important? Not just so I can go out and talk about, more poor people and more ex-cons. No, it's because I'm getting advice that I'm using, and my life is getting better. This is the amazing thing. When you look to new kinds of people who are not your ordinary idols, when the heroes are at the periphery of society and you learn their secrets, those work for you even better. So I want to give you two. This is where the promise comes in. I'm going to tell you the two that are blowing my mind the most right now, that are helping me the most, and I think if you do these things too, your life's going to get better. Two practices of the startup life. Practice number one is to take more risk, not less. You know, it doesn't make sense. When you talk to people who've been in prison, you think that they've taken too much risk. You talk to these guys, they're very open about the mistakes that they've made. It's sort of extraordinary. And it's always dumb stuff. You know, it's what, so what'd you do? Well, you know, so idiotic. I robbed the liquor store next door to my house. You know, stuff like that. Where you go, really? Really? You know, what a dumb risk to take. Take less risk. It turns out to be wrong. Take more risk in the right places. That turns out to be one of the real secrets to success. And to explain this, I want to tell you about a really interesting study. A really interesting study that I like a lot. It's from a National Bureau of Economic Research working paper, NBER working paper, you know, published right here. It's by Steve Levitt. Steve Levitt is an economist at the University of Chicago. He wrote Freakonomics. That's why his name is familiar. And he's one of the most interesting economists of our time. He doesn't just answer things well, he asks the most interesting questions, which is why I just love his stuff. I'm a really big fan. And Steve Levitt has been asking lately how people make hard decisions. Okay, so think in your life right now about something you're in agony making a decision over. But probably a third of you, maybe a half of you, are thinking about something that you can't decide. Like, I don't know what to do. And for people who are younger, it's kind of like, do I end a relationship? That's a common one. Later in life, you know, should I make a career change? It's really hard, but a personal thing that you're agonizing over. So Steve Levitt knows that this is going on in a lot of people's lives, and he wants to know if they systematically make the right decision or not when they're confronted with this kind of dilemma. So what does he do? He puts out a big campaign to get people who are in agony to let him make the decision with the flip of a coin. And 6,000 people sign up, right? Which is amazing. I mean, imagine letting an economist choose whether or not you stay with your boyfriend with the flip of a coin. 6,000 people did that, which is, I love social science. It's just great. And it wasn't just undergraduates who got $20 each, which is usually how social scientists do that kind of experiment. It was people all over the country with all sorts of things. Okay, here's how it worked. They would send in their dilemma, and he didn't flip a coin, a computer made the decision. And he would automatically send back a message, heads or tails. Head means do it, whatever it is, yes or no decision. Tails means don't do it. Okay. And they did it. They had a huge response rate. People generally followed the instruction to do it. But here's where it got interesting. He wanted to know if the yeses were happier or unhappier than the nos, significantly. And he assessed it 6 months after the fact. 6 months after the fact, he follows up with all of them, and what does he find? Yeses were 1 entire digit happier than the nos, which is massively statistically significant in this experiment. What does this mean? We have a no bias, and it's hurting us. It's a problem. We need to say yes more if we want to be happier. We want to say yes more. You got to think about that thing in your life. You should say yes, according to the data. It's most likely right. More on that here in a second. When I talk to the guys in the President Entrepreneurship program about the real risks in their lives, you know the risks that they weren't taking? You know what they were really, really afraid of doing? Getting married, taking care of their kids, taking an ordinary job. That's what they were really worried about doing. It seemed really risky, and they were frightened of that stuff, and they'll say it openly afterwards. I was too afraid to do that, right? I mean, wait a minute, you're not afraid to knock over a liquor store, but you're afraid to marry your girlfriend? The answer is yeah. Turns out that stuff is really scary. Love is scary. right? And it's scary for you too, by the way. Changing jobs is scary for you too. These are the big risks we take in life. And when they actually learn the principles of personal entrepreneurship, treating their lives as enterprises, and started taking those risks, their lives changed dramatically, and dramatically for the better. They got happier. They became more successful. Now, I'm conflating personal entrepreneurship with life decisions, like getting married and having kids, right? Is that appropriate? Well, I got a new study too. I just read this the other day. It's from Finland. These two social psychologists, they're putting men in their 30s into MRI machines, okay? And they're looking at brain images of these guys. Why? Half of them are entrepreneurs. And they put these entrepreneurs in the MRI machines, fMRI machines, and they show them photos of their businesses, okay? The other half are dads in their 30s. And they put them in the MRI machines and show them pictures of their kids, right? And what do they find about the images? They're the same image. Now, we don't know. Are entrepreneurs, do they think of their kids as a startup? Or do dads think of their kids as an entrepreneurial endeavor? Or do entrepreneurs think of their businesses as babies? I don't know. But the point is, we see these things in the same way. They didn't do it on women, I don't know. I mean, they should do it on everybody, but they hadn't, right? But this is interesting, isn't it? We have an entrepreneurial mindset toward these things in our lives. And when we embrace it as such, we get the adventure in life. So that's lesson number 1 of the startup life. Think about the decision you're trying to make but can't. Say yes. It's probably the right decision. Practice number 2. Practice number 2. Use your weaknesses to be successful. You know, I talked to you about the Gallup Strengths Finder a minute ago. And the principle of the Gallup Strengths Finder is great. It's find your strengths and play to your strengths. De-emphasize your weaknesses and emphasize your strengths. I mean, it's as old as the hills. Everybody tells you that's good advice as a general principle. But the prison entrepreneurship guys, they show you, and on all entrepreneurs, by the way, they show you that playing up your strengths is one secret to success. Another secret to success is emphasizing your own weaknesses. It's weird, right? But hear me out. When you talk to entrepreneurs, which I do all the time, all these really, wealthy people and these guys who started, big hedge funds and software firms, and you ask them, and do this if you haven't done this before, ask, tell me about your path to success, right? Here's what they never say. Well, I inherited a lot of money, and I was born with a really high IQ, and I went to the best schools, and so it was kind of inevitable I'd be successful. They don't say that. You know what they talk about? All the hard things they endured. Well, bankruptcies and long hours, and my first wife left me because all I did was work. But I persevered, right? They talk about their weaknesses and their tragedies and their failures. I'm friends with a guy who started Home Depot. His name is Bernie Marcus. He's a guy who supports my organization. And he talks about when he's starting Home Depot. Home Depot, right? Everybody knows Home Depot. It was successful from the first day. Wrong. When Home Depot was starting in Atlanta, he literally had so few customers that he sent his kids out to Peachtree Street handing out $1 bills in exchange for people to go in the store, right? And he talked about the fact that his wife wouldn't let him shave alone with a razor blade in the bathroom. It was so grim for him at that time. He doesn't talk about, oh yeah, and then we made $1 billion. No. He talks about the hard things. Entrepreneurs think in terms of failure and in terms of tragedy, seeing it as opportunity. When entrepreneurs, natural entrepreneurs, when everybody else is saying, there's no good bars and restaurants in this neighborhood, the entrepreneur goes, aha, you think it's bad. I think it's good. It's an opportunity. For that matter, social entrepreneurs, and they say there's an opiate crisis in this country. They say that's an opportunity to do good. They see the sense of startup happening all over. And life entrepreneurs look inside themselves and see their personal failings as a source of their strength. I noticed that the guys, when they get really lit up entrepreneurially, it's when they're connecting with other people and giving advice. I say, what are you doing in the spare time? And they say, well, I go into high schools and I tell kids that drugs and alcohol are really bad news because they could end up like me. Because I got stoned every day in 8th grade, and by the time I was in high school, I was addicted to drugs, and then I ended up in prison, right? they use their weaknesses as a way to connect to other people. Or they say to these young guys, take responsibility when your girlfriend gets pregnant. Because if you don't, you're not going to be part of the kid's life, and it's heartbreaking. Trust me, when I was in prison, I thought every day about my children. This is how they talk. They use their weaknesses to connect to others as a source of their own strength. So I got to thinking, does that work for you? Does that work for me? Let me tell you, as I thought about this, how it worked for me. Changed my whole approach to work, as a matter of fact. You know, at the very beginning, I told you that I was a musician instead of a scholar at the very beginning. I actually dropped out of college when I was 19. You know, dropped out, kicked out, splitting hairs. And I went on the road playing music, which is what I always wanted to do. But you know, when you're in the world of the arts, it always grates on you that you didn't go to college. My dad was a college professor. My grandfather was a college professor. And it disappointed my parents. And when you're around these fancy culture people, you know the one question that people always ask you? Where'd you go to college? And when you say, well, I didn't go to college, you know what they say? And it feels rotten, right? So when I was 27, I was trying to figure out how I could fix this problem, how to go back to college. And one of my friends said, well, you should go to correspondence school. Because I didn't have any money and I was on the road. So I go to correspondence school. You can do it really cheaply. You can do it from any place. And I thought, So I looked into it and I did a little research and I found this place in Trenton, New Jersey called Thomas Edison State College. Totally, alternative learning for adults, something. But it was correspondence school, basically. So I enrolled and I became an economics major and I graduated in about 3 years. Okay, and I got to tell you, I killed it in correspondence school. and I felt really good about it. I got really good grades, and I was very proud of this. I graduated 1 month before my 30th birthday. I'd done it. And I mean, it was great. But I didn't know what the degree was worth, right? I mean, is this degree actually worth anything? And I found out. Here's how I found out. One of my mail order professors wrote me a letter saying, good job in correspondence school, straight A's. You should go get a PhD. Go get a PhD in economics. I'm like, really? Can one do that? Is that possible? And I said, where should I do it? He said, you should do it at Harvard University. And I said, no way. That's impossible. I didn't know anybody who'd gone to Harvard. It's like Shangri-La, man. I mean, nobody I knew in the history of anybody. I grew up in a working class neighborhood in Seattle, Washington. I mean, I had academics in the family, but Harvard. Something mythical. But he really got my confidence up. He said, yes, you can. And so I said, maybe he's right. So I got all my materials together, lovingly wrote essays, did the GREs, the whole deal. And I applied to the PhD program at Harvard University. And my application beat me home from the post office. It got rejected so fast. I mean, no was basically the answer. No. It turns out that Harvard was not, at the time, in the market for a 30-year-old college dropout French horn player with a correspondence degree. Who knew? So, and I wasn't resentful about it. I mean, it kind of made sense to me a little bit. I wanted to find out what the degree was worth. So I said to my wife, I want to know how close I came. I'm going to call him. And my wife's like, you're an idiot. But I called anyway. I called the admissions office just to know because I had no information. So I called and says, I just got rejected. She said, I'm a nice lady. I'm sorry. And I said, yeah, but no problem. But I want to know how close I came. How close did I come? She said, okay, name. And I hear like filing cabinets opening and closing and rustling of papers. And she comes back like 2 minutes later and she says, not close. And at this point, I'm like humiliated and in a panic, so I start negotiating, kind of like, was I in the top half? And she's like, no. And it was horrible. It was horrible. So I went down to the next graduate school and got rejected, the next one and the next one. And finally, I got to a graduate school that wasn't paying close attention, and I got in. And I did my PhD, and I came out, and I went into academia, and I never told anybody. Because when you're in academia, people always ask, well, where'd you do your undergraduate? And I would say, I did it at Harvard University, right? I didn't lie, but I didn't bring it up. Then I went to correspondence school because I was embarrassed about it. It was really embarrassing to me. And all my friends at Maxwell, fancy school, they all went to Harvard. They all went to these great schools. But I never said anything. And then the years went by. And then they made me president of the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, a fancy think tank, and I still never told anybody. I just kept it to myself. I didn't hide it, no lying. It's on the Vita, technically, but I didn't bring it up. And a year after I came to AEI, I decided to hire a scholar, a faculty member, in the economics of higher education. Why? Because higher education's all screwed up in this country. It's too expensive, there's too much debt, too many people don't finish, there's not enough intellectual diversity or ideological diversity. You know these problems as well as anybody. We gotta fix this, and AEI is fixing problems. So I hired this guy, his name is Andrew Kelly. He's a great scholar, and he has the academic background I always wanted. Undergraduate degree at Dartmouth, PhD from Berkeley. The guy's great. And I sit him down. It's a complete academic free environment. I don't tell people what they have to do work on. I ask them what they want to do work on. I know it's higher ed. And I bring him in, he's in my office, and say, Andrew, what's your first project going to be? He says, I've always dreamed about doing a research project on fly-by-night correspondence schools. And I'm like, doomed. The jig is up, right? But I don't say anything because I think I'm being cool because I figure maybe nothing happens, right? So I'm, I laying low, and a month later I get an email from Andrew in the middle of the night. Hey, Arthur, I just want to let you know I'm looking at the Wikipedia site for this place called Thomas Edison State College, and you're not going to believe it, but they're claiming you're an alum. So, dude, you got to get that cleared up. and now the jig is really up. So I think, what am I going to do at this point? What would you do? I figured, go big or go home. I wrote about it in the New York Times. I wrote a column called My Cheap, Valuable College Degree, where I described the fact that I wouldn't have had the job I had. I wouldn't have the life I had if I had not found a place where I could get a college degree, soup to nuts, including the books, for 10 grand in today's dollars, which I did, including, by the way, a sticker for the car, which I didn't put on the car because I was embarrassed. And I wrote it in the New York Times. I said, what's the reaction going to be? And I waited, and it was the most popular piece in the Times for 2 weeks. And I started getting email. I went there too. I didn't tell anybody. Thank you for writing that column, right? I got a letter from a lady who said, my son dropped out of college 10 years ago, and he's really struggling. And I showed him your article, and I think he's going to enroll. Thank you. And everybody who wrote to me almost was a first-generation college student in the history of their family. Now, I'm not. I didn't have that excuse. But I needed opportunity. I needed it. I didn't have it. That's where I found it. God bless Thomas Edison State College. And all of the people who were writing to me, they needed opportunity too. And here's what occurred to me. Here's why I bring this up. I thought it was my weakness. It wasn't. It was my strength. I've dedicated my career. No. I've dedicated my professional life to connecting with people at the periphery of society. I'm in the think tank business because I care about poverty and opportunity the most. And I had one thing, my friends, that was truly connecting me to people who needed opportunity because I needed it too. And that one point of connection I had ignored, and I was ashamed of it, and I denied it for 20 years. Isn't that ironic? So here's a question for you. What is your weakness that you're running away from? There is one. Y'all have one. What is your weakness? How can that be your strength? Make that your strength. Be like the people in the Prison Entrepreneurship Program and turn it into your source of strength in empathizing and connecting with people in our society who need that to be fixed as well. Now, before I finish, I want to make one more quick point. It might sound really subversive, this central thesis that I'm making, which is that we have the wrong heroes. Edison and Ford and Alexander Graham Bell and Steve Jobs, these really shouldn't be our main heroes. They're great, but our real heroes should be the people at the margins of society who started at zero, the guys in the Prison Entrepreneurship Program, the people who have built their way and earned their success from nothing. Those should be our heroes. That might sound like I'm subverting the American dream, the Horatio Alger story, right? That's wrong. That's wrong, because this country was not built by wealthy entrepreneurs. No. This country was built by people like the guys in the Prison Entrepreneurship Program. all of you, and some of you are immigrants, and some of you descend from immigrants, and some of your ancestors were scratching out potatoes, and some of them were running from a pogrom, and some of them came here involuntarily. But one thing that they all had in common, you know what it is? They were ambitious riffraff. They were like the people in the prison entrepreneurship program. And we're proud of the fact that they're ambitious riffraff, It's a month ago I was giving a talk someplace, and I used that turn of phrase, I don't know why. And afterward, a guy puts up his hand, it's like Q&A, and I call on him, and he says, I just want you to know that I resent the way that you characterize my ancestors. And I'm like, oh boy, here we go. He says, they were not ambitious. Look, you know what I love about this country is it's a country of outcasts. I'm married to an immigrant, and when she came to this country, and by the way, my wife graduated from high school when she was 29. So if you want to know how to raise kids and advice to give them, advise them not to drop out of high school at 16 to sing with a rock band. That's not the secret to most people's success. You just ask my wife. The point is, when she came to this country, she didn't speak English, she didn't have a high school diploma, and she worked for 3 years at a minimum wage job because we needed the money. And she said, God bless this country, where if you want to work, you can do well. I want that to continue to be true, but it's only going to continue to be true if we remember that the heroes of our culture, the heroes of our society, are not the wealthy people. They're not the lucky people. They're not the people with the big houses and the yachts. They're the people who've gone from the bottom, below the bottom, up to the point of living with dignity and living with self-respect and earning their success as they see it, whether they make a lot of money or not. So here's the idea, my friends. Do you want to start up life? Then follow them. If you do those things of taking the real risks in life, of remembering that your weaknesses are your source of your strength, you're going to be happier, you're going to help people a lot more, and that is the secret to true success. Thank you.
So thank you for that, Arthur.
Thank you, Leah.
That was fantastic. And just a quick, I have a million questions, but just before we jump into it, a quick little anecdote. I know several of the students in my class are here today. I teach a class called Conservatives and Liberals in America. And I mentioned a couple weeks ago that Arthur Brooks would be speaking at the forum, and everyone in the class was excited. And I have to say, teaching the class has been one of the greatest things that I've done here at the Kennedy School. I love it. I absolutely love it. But it's also one of the hardest things that I've done here. And I think that it should be hard because we really wrestle with ideas, with ideologies, with perspectives that are very different from all of ours. But I think the one thing that emerged that was pretty consistent was that when I mentioned that you would be coming here to speak, the enthusiasm really stemmed, I think, from, or there's one way of characterizing it, which is that, again, my students are really interested in ideas, regardless of whether they are on the left or the right, and they know that you are a man of ideas. And so they were really intrigued by the possibility of coming in and talking to you and hearing from you. So for that, I thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate it. What a wonderful place, by the way, where people are excited by the concept of ideas. That makes only the people in this room, I think, but still, that's really great.
So I thought I would start out by really thinking through some of these ideas, right? And some of the ideas that you mentioned in the talk, but especially ideas that have really come up as constants in your work and themes in your work, especially this idea of the value and the dignity of labor and work. And I'm really attracted to this idea of what's necessary right now is a reimagining of work, of possibility, of value, and of opportunity for the 21st century. I think it's incredibly important, as you rightly know, to center really the voices that are at the margins and the lived experience of people who are at the margins in this regard. So I thought with that in mind, just a few questions for you that are rooted really in the everyday experience of ordinary people at the margins. So the first one is to really think about, are people valuing the work that they're currently doing? So thinking here about the difference between having a job for survival, right? And you talked very nicely about that, about holding down, kind of you and your wife holding down minimum wage jobs, as opposed to a job that you value. Now they can go together, but oftentimes they are at odds. The second part of that is really thinking about what does a valued job or valued work look like? And then really, how do we create jobs that people value? Or better yet, how do we really rethink undervalued, unappreciated work or jobs and really transforming them into good and valued jobs? And then the last question, which I think is particularly salient given the remarks you just gave, is I think this idea of opportunity is incredibly important. And it's one that has deep significance, and I know a lot of students here are constantly really thinking about that. But I'm wondering, how do we introduce opportunity in a substantive policy manner, right? So here at a policy school, as we think about ideas, thinking about instituting ideas, what are the ways that we can make opportunity happen so that it goes beyond, say, 25 men and women in Texas, or 100 men and women in Massachusetts, or even 2,000 people across the United States? How do we make it something that is actually transforming society from a policy perspective? So those are a lot of questions in one, but.
Sure, absolutely, and thank you for that. Those are all hugely important questions that I think about a lot. There is a commission that David and Elwood and I are part of these days. It's a commission, a nationwide commission sponsored by the Gates Foundation on poverty, on mobility from poverty is the idea. And Greg is on it, and it's something that we all feel really strongly about because we're looking for solutions that answer a lot of these questions. And we're not looking for better subsistence for poor people. We're looking for better lives for everybody. And I think if I can summarize the goals of the commission that everybody has, and it's like a lot of progressives and a couple of conservatives and a lot of people in the middle, and the one thing we all agree on is the equality of human dignity and the idea that everybody has human potential. Those are the ideas that are behind this commission, why it's such an exciting prospect to be able to do some of these things. And in part of our discussions, I want to bring up when you talk about valuing work, let me tell you about one of the things that we've talked about that's been especially exciting. And it's been kind of eye-opening for a lot of us. What is it about work that makes work valuable for a person, him or herself? And the answer is it's valuable for other people. Valuable for other people. And I had this one experience a minor epiphany, kind of opened my eyes to it, when I was listening to a homily by a now deceased Roman Catholic cardinal named Francis George, who was the Cardinal of Chicago. And he was the great intellectual of the Catholic Church in America, where when he talked, people really listened. So I was listening to an old lecture that he gave on poverty, about the role that all of us have in alleviating poverty. And I was listening to it in the context of this commission, because I was going to this meeting and I was really paying attention. And here's what Cardinal George said to his richest donors about their obligation to help poor people. Here's what he said. He said, "The poor need you to pull them out of poverty, and you need the poor to pull you out of hell." Which I thought that was a pretty gutsy move, talking to his richest donors, saying that. And I also resolved not to raise money for the American Enterprise Institute using that language. But here's the insight. Here's the insight. Insight was not an answer, it was a question. I asked myself, I know we're really good, we could be better, but we're good at helping poor people, more than we've ever been in history. Are we good at needing poor people? Because that's the basis of dignity that comes from valuing work. If you want to value work and feel yourself to be a valued member of society, you have to do something that other people value. And I fundamentally believe that the biggest mistake that we've made in this country is that we've gone from needing poor people to helping poor people. Now, I want to help poor people all day long. So do you. So do all of us in here. But when we create an economy, and we create a social welfare safety net, and we create a basis of jobs and opportunity where some non-trivial percentage of the population is superfluous, they know it. And that's where we get into valuation problems. So the answer to the question is, what can we do to make more people more valuable? What do we do not so that we can help people more, not so we can spread around more income so that more people have more welfare and they can spend more money on whatever? Fine, do that. Don't do that, do that. That's an argument that we're constantly having about the social welfare safety net. Personally, I'm a big believer in a relatively generous safety net. Not everybody is. Okay, but that's not the question at hand. What are we doing to need them more? What are we doing in education to make them necessary? I dare say next to nothing for big parts of the population. We park them in public education systems that haven't changed in decades. We're not thinking creatively how to get them ready for the skills that the American economy needs and that match their skills and their passions. What are we doing about jobs so that we remember that honest, ordinary work is critically important for meaning and purpose in people's lives? What are we doing for families so that we don't fragment communities and so that families can actually have opportunities based around the concept that parents can and should work? What are we doing with cultural values where we talk about our own, everybody in here, we got secrets to success. You know where they come from? You feel needed. Every single person in this room feels needed. That's one of the reasons that you're happy. What are we doing to spread that through our own cultural values, the secrets to success that you bring into your own lives where you have this kind of success? Are we talking openly and without embarrassment about those secrets to success? I dare say we've gotten very bad about not feeling embarrassed about our cultural values that bring that. And those are the ideas, the things that I think that can rejuvenate our society and guide public policy.
Okay. So I'm glad you mentioned the social welfare safety net, and I'm really glad to hear that you're, a generous supporter or supporter of a generous social safety net.
Well, I pay a lot of taxes, so I'm really a generous supporter of it. Yeah. I'm a donor. Think of me as a donor.
Well, so I think it introduces kind of this idea about, you mentioned risk and capital and taking these big risks, and I am really curious about this idea of how do we allow room for people to take very big risks, right? So what is it? Is it providing, ensuring that there's a safety net there? Is it ensuring that there's access, there's opportunity? But what do we do so that people aren't necessarily, thinking about, can I take this risk? Can I afford to take this risk? And then what happens if I fail? Mm-hmm.
Well, the American entrepreneurial system has a very strange part to it, which is called, non-recourse loans, where you can actually go bankrupt and it won't ruin your life. And one of the reasons that we have this lending system is because we want entrepreneurs to be able to go broke. Quite frankly, we want to facilitate bankruptcy. That's why if you're in Holland and you have a business and your business goes broke, they will chase you till the end of your days. You'll be a social outcast, but the bank will go after every asset you have forever. So the result of that is that we don't have an incentive outside of the United States, in most countries, to actually start businesses. That has a downside to it, by the way. The downside to it is that people go bust. I mean, we have a president of the United States who went bust at least 4 times. That's not what we're looking for, I dare say, right? But so we got to find the balance in there, but that's one of the ways that we do it. I think that the important thing to keep in mind is, what does bankruptcy mean in all different parts of risk and life? And I think that all of us can think creatively about public policies and ways to lower the cost of people taking these risks. What does it mean with respect to education? What does it mean with respect to relationships? What does it mean with respect to jobs and training? I don't know, but I think that that's kind of the way I'd want to start answering that question.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask one more question before we open it up to questions from the audience, because I want to make sure that we get some other voices in here. And I think the last question that I'll ask is that we're in a moment right now of what feels a lot like intense and increased polarization and partisanship. So I'm really curious about, especially given your experience working across these various mediums, talking to various communities, talking to people on the ground, particularly at the margins, how do conservatives, how do liberals, how do progressives, everything in between, right? How do we find common ground? And then perhaps more importantly, common solutions to these very big pressing problems, particularly around issues of inequality and poverty.
No, thank you. What a wonderful question, and what a relevant question for our times. When people talk about political polarization, they point to political anger. And that's actually not quite the problem that we have. We don't have an anger problem in American politics. We have a contempt problem in American politics. And contempt is defined by social psychologists as the utter conviction of the worthlessness of another human being. If you listen to people talk to each other in political life today, they talk to each other with pure contempt. Now, why do I bring that up? Because another point that psychologists ordinarily make is that contempt has no resolution. Contempt leads to permanent animus between people. If you want a permanent enemy, treat them as if they are utterly worthless. There's a guy at the University of Washington named John Gottman, and he's a real hero to me because I don't know him personally. We've corresponded, but I don't know him personally. He has a laboratory in marital reconciliation. And from my point of view, I mean, there's no society in the history of humankind that doesn't have family at the basis of its progress and its success, and marriage is part of that. Successful marriage is part of that. And this guy brings married couples together who are on their way to divorce court. Fantastic. And here's one of the things that he finds. He claims that he can take a videotape of a couple that's having a quarrel and turn the volume down to 0, and in 5 seconds, silently watching an argument, he can predict whether that couple will be divorced within 5 years with 94% accuracy. So you want to know what he's looking for, right? And the answer is eye rolling. Eye rolling, the ultimate sign. And I got 3 teenagers, so I see lots of eye rolling, right? And why is that? That's a physical sign of contempt. And when you show physical contempt, it's almost like a physical assault on somebody who should love you. The same thing is true in politics. The same thing is true in business. The same thing is true in student life. When somebody around you treats you with contempt, you never quite forget it. So if we want to solve the problem in polarization today, not just in political expression, but in examining what's written on our hearts, we have to solve the contempt problem. If we want to work together for solutions in politics, we cannot treat each other with contempt. That's at the root of the problem. That's not the only problem, but that's the root of the problem. So I asked, Doug Elmendorf brought up at the very beginning, I sometimes write with the Dalai Lama now, which is this wonderful collaboration. It's sort of life-changing for me that I've gotten to know him as a co-author, sort of as a friend, collaborating over the past 5 years. And I see him every year in his monastery in the Himalayan foothills in India, in Dharamshala. And last time I was there, I was thinking about this contempt problem. I said, he's like the wisest guy I know. And I said, Your Holiness, what do I do when I feel contempt? And he said, practice warm-heartedness. And I said, you got anything else? Come on. And then I thought about it, and I thought, actually, it's not so easy. It's not so easy, is it? Think about it, doing something that's that hard. And I thought about the Dalai Lama himself, who, by the way, was exiled when he was a teenager as the leader of the Tibetan Buddhist people, motivated by a takeover through naked aggression by the communist Chinese. Forced into exile, to be poor and forgotten, and every day he confronted that on the world stage, and over 70 years became the most respected religious figure in the world, practicing warm-heartedness. He starts every day, by the way, he told me, praying for the Chinese leaders. Not that they'll give him back his homeland, but they'll have good lives with enlightenment. That, my friends, is not for sissies. That's for strong, tough people. Agree with him or disagree with him about what's going on in China, that's for tough people. I said, And I started thinking about it, and it's true that when we do that, when we have leaders who can do that, it's utterly world-changing. He says, I defeat my enemies when I make them my friends. And you do that by answering their contempt with warm-heartedness. Now, I have a really weird job running AEI. I get to work with the leaders in the House and the Senate all the time. I do a series of debate training sessions, of communication sessions with the heads of the committees in the U.S. House of Representatives. I have unbelievable access, and I'm very lucky to have it. And this is what I tell them. Catch yourself. You can be part of the problem. You can show true strength if next time you hear contempt, you answer with warm-heartedness. And the same thing is true for each one of us, because every person in this room is in a leadership position, every single one of us. And every single one of us is going to have an opportunity on social media or in person to answer somebody's contempt. Are you going to do it the right thing and make the world a little bit better and show your strength and make your enemies your friends? Or are you going to make the problem worse? That's a question each of us gets to answer probably in the next 24 hours.
Okay, so we're going to open it up to questions, and I would invite people in the audience to come and step up to the microphones. There are 4 at various sections of the forum. Just 3 quick rules before we get started, which is 1, identify yourself. So make sure you tell us who you are. 2, make sure that it is 1 brief question per person. And 3, that question part is really important. Make sure your question is actually a question and not a statement or something else. So with that, why don't we start off over here?
Hi, my name's Philip Balson. I'm a sophomore at the college. So you talked about the importance of the dignity of work in making someone feel valued because their life is valuable and their work is valuable to other people. We, at the same time, as much as we've been talking about inequality for the past 10 or 15 years, think that we are maybe at the beginning of a second massive wave of the loss of working class jobs with automation following the wave that happened due to globalization. If that really happens in trucking and healthcare and other industries, and we lose tens of millions of jobs, if the working class labor force participation rate keeps declining, does that scare you in terms of the consequences for American society, or do you think there's some way to restore dignity to people who've had it taken away from them in that way?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for that question. It does scare me. And it scares me when I look with respect to the American status quo. So if we don't change anything that we're doing right now, we're in a lot of trouble, because this is going to happen. Look, progress is going to continue. I mean, when you go to Northern California, the question they always have is like, when are artificial intelligence and robots going to lay everybody off? And the canonical case is that of drivers, because driverless cars are coming, and they're going to be great for society, but they're going to be horrible for a huge class of jobs. If we don't change the way that we do things, it's going to be a big problem. Here's the good news. We can change what we do. We can actually change the way that we train people. We have a tendency to say that the working class jobs have been under assault, and outsourcing and the rise of China, and to a lesser extent immigration, that these things have been horrible for the American working class. The reason for that is that we've had a complete lack of imagination about how people receive their skills and the human capital that we infuse in them as a society. We have the same education, same kind of mildly unsuccessful education system that we crank people through year after year. That was the same education system fundamentally, and same technology even, as when my dad was a kid. And we expect different outcomes. That, by the way, is the definition of insanity. We have to do things fundamentally differently. And so let me give you one piece of encouraging news. We could create 5 to 10 million blue-collar jobs that don't currently exist in this country and soak up millions of people that are going to be displaced. Why? Because we have millions of vocational and technical jobs in this country that are currently unfilled. And the reason that they're unfilled is because people don't have the skills. We just finished at AEI, we finished making this documentary film, and part of it was shot in this town in eastern Kentucky, in Martin County, the county seat called Inez, Kentucky. And you go down there, 29% of the adults are in the workforce. 40% are on welfare. This is a sad place. And you talk to all these, these men who are completely idle, just walking around during the middle of the day. And, you say, like, man, you don't need OxyContin, you need a U-Haul. Get out of Dodge, go someplace and do someplace where there is a job. And you know what they say? And do what? And do what? And it's the right question, because they don't have the skills to move to North Dakota and work on a pipeline and weld on a pipeline. They don't have the skills to do it. We need a country, unless we want to have the same stupid, unproductive conversation that marginalizes the poor and treats them as liabilities instead of assets in 10 years. We want to have the same conversation. Let's do exactly what we're doing. But if we don't, then let's talk about how vocational training and skills training and apprenticeships, a national apprenticeship program, and how trade schools and getting rid of this stupid culture of everybody's got to go to college or they're a total loser. Let's think creatively about those things. And you know what? I'm not so sure if we did those things that we would have such a big crisis after all. So that's my note of hope.
My name is Luke Haney. I'm a half junior, half senior in the college because I took time off. I didn't play French horn, but...
Half junior, half senior, well done.
It's actually a great question because it also segues into mine, which is a question of how do you think notions of success and entrepreneurship split by class? And when entrepreneurs choose to use their strength of sharing a weakness, if these notions of success are different, how can entrepreneurs effectively bridge that gap?
So tell me the first part of your question again. I missed
How
one.
how do notions of success and entrepreneurship differ by class? So for example, maybe it's unseemly for like an upper middle class family from Manhattan to have their son be a welder, for example. And how do you think that might play into this?
It's a wonderful question, because basically this digs into one of the huge problems that we have, which is class. Is the way that we're fragmenting with respect to class and class expectations. Robert Putnam, I don't think he was here, who, one of the great intellects of the last 50 years in social science for sure, he writes this great book, Our Kids. And you got to read it. If you haven't read Our Kids, it's an unbelievable book, because it shows that people at the bottom and the top, they don't even know each other. And so they can't share each other's notions of success. They don't have any, they're not each other's neighbors. They don't go to each other's churches. Fantastic book. It's very eye-opening. It's the same kind of work that Charles Murray did in Coming Apart in 2012. It's a very similar book. And it makes the same point about classes not mixing very much. So what do we know from that? We know that if we mixed more, we might have a broader repertoire of what success looks like. And we could save so much heartache, by the way. I can't tell you how many of people that I work with at AEI or fancy people in Washington D.C. and their kid is not doing great in high school, and the kid comes home with this news, I don't think I'm going to go to college, and it's like a huge crisis, right? That shouldn't be a huge crisis. It shouldn't be a huge crisis. I mean, college didn't work out for me. And again, not everybody's going to take a gap decade and play the French horn and wind up running a think tank. I got it. But in point of fact, there are tons of ways to be successful if we could break class lines and explain the different means of success. And the only way we can do that is actually by mixing more. So I think the objective for us should be, in public policy, but more importantly in modern culture, what are we doing today such that we mix with people who are different than us? This is the true cultural and moral objective of diversity, by the way, is so that we can understand each other's notions of success and empathize with each other's notions of, or experiences of failure.
Yep. Hi, thanks so much for coming. I'm Dora, I'm a sophomore at the college. So how do you account for this discrepancy in the entrepreneurial spirit that is so specifically designated as a psychological phenomenon, and yet the ability of scores of people to be able to harness this entrepreneurial spirit in themselves? Is it that there's some X factor that the psychological literature just has it wrong? What is it?
No, it's a very interesting question. So there's a good lit in that psychologists who work in B schools are doing right now on something called EO, entrepreneurial orientation. And ordinarily it's looked at firms, the entrepreneurial orientation of a firm, the risk-taking, proactive nature of the firm. More interesting in my view is the entrepreneurial orientation of individuals. And it's abundantly clear that sure enough, if you're looking at the narrow concept of business starting, that 2% are natural business starters. But when you talk about entrepreneurial proclivities, with respect to the entrepreneurial approach that you take to life, everybody can have higher EO. So that's what they're doing in the prison entrepreneurship program, is some of them are really entrepreneurial and some of them not, but everybody's getting pushed down the number line where 0 is nothing and 1 is everything. Everybody's getting pushed toward 1, and that's what I think we should do psychologically. Each one of us should be having the experiences that push us to higher EO, which brings us more happiness and greater sense of empathy toward others. There's this guy at Wash U in St. Louis. His name is Robert Cloninger, and he does this work on something called neophilia. And neophilia is simply the love of new things. And one of the interesting things that he finds is that you can cultivate a love of new things by going out of your way to having new experiences and interacting, as we talked about before, with people you've never met who are really, really unlike you. And just doing that will push you on the number line toward greater EO. And that's what we should be doing. Again, you want to know why we need communities that are super diverse? Because we need higher entrepreneurial orientation. And the same thing is true for you. You can have a better life if you think of the music. If you go, I mean, it maybe like, I've never gone to the opera. Go to the opera. Trust me, it's great. But that's not my point. And I think that you can, and each one of us has that open to us, and we can be successful. Thank you.
So I think we have time for one more question.
Do we have two more?
so-
We got two at the mics.
okay.
Can we
All
can I
right.
negotiate that?
I
Actually, we have-
think we can. Okay,
All
all
right,
right.
all right.
So we'll do one up here, and we'll see where the
And I'll be quick.
last
I'll be
one.
really, really fast.
last one
Sorry,
takes
Dan
us.
Hanrahan, a student at the Kennedy School. I've moved over from Australia, and one thing that has really struck me is how the idea of self-reliance can be used to justify not providing a safety net or support for people. So there are people that have been able to pull each other up from the bootstraps.
Yep.
And therefore, we don't have to provide healthcare or we don't have to support it because people are able to do that by themselves. So how do you balance your stories of people that are able to pull themselves up from having nothing while also mitigating some of the consequences of that?
Yeah, this is the big question when we come to how we actually build a safety net and how big it should be. And this is where right and left tend to come down on different sides of it. My view is that the safety net, and again, I have a kind of an older conservative view of this. Friedrich Hayek, the greatest mind of conservative libertarian economics of the 20th century, he said that the role of government, if you look at this great book, The Constitution of Liberty, he says that the role of the government is to redress market failures and to provide a safety net. It's old school. I mean, Reagan extolled the virtues of the safety net. And my own personal view is that maybe the greatest achievement of the free enterprise system is the safety net. For the first time in human history, we have the largesse that's created by capitalism, such that we have the money to help take care of people through government that we've never met. It's an unbelievable achievement. The problem is when we actually subsidize the wrong things that demobilize people and create what Marty Seligman, the social psychologist at UPenn, what he calls learned helplessness. It's a terrible thing to do to people. You have two choices. You have choices. I mean, the polar opposites are learned helplessness and earned success. So think about this. Does my safety net make people more needed or more superfluous? Does it make it harder for families to maintain integrity? Does it fragment communities? Does it create incentives for people to not work? Those are the things that we shouldn't do. We should have an abundant safety net that makes work pay, that requires work, that keeps communities together, but also makes people more mobile so they can go where opportunities are. Those are the four parts of the safety net as I see it. So you don't have to be either or. You don't have to be at all. You just have to design it in the right way. And this is the way, by the way, that I think the progressives and conservatives can have a conversation that's a lot more holistically integrated than what we've had in the past. Thank you for that wonderful question.
Okay, so we'll go over here.
All right.
Thank you so much. My name is Ben Blink. I'm a master's in public policy student here at the Kennedy School. You were talking about some of the structural challenges with the economy before, and it seems as though the solutions that you're proposing were to increase mobility, so get people into the jobs where the jobs are available, and slotting people into the right types of educational systems that can get them there. Right. What are maybe 2 or 3 very specific federal or state public policy solutions that can actually move us in that direction, or again, just fix some of these structural problems?
For sure. Now, the best solutions are not going to be federal to begin with. I mean, we have a federalized mentality. When I was teaching at the Maxwell School, my MPA students, we cranked 120 new ones through a year, and they really all wanted to go into the federal government. That's not where the action is, my friends. The action is in policy experimentation and entrepreneurship is at the state and local level, because that's where you should try these things that can later be scaled up. So the most interesting things when we talk about mobility for people, and let's talk about one element of mobility because we got to move off this quick. Geographic mobility. I'm hard over on increasing geographic mobility. You know, the idea of the integrity of Inez, Kentucky, I can't buy it because it's not a community of opportunity. It's a community of despair. And okay, if there's stuff to do there, that's fantastic, but I want more people to be able to move out. That's very American, by the way. I mean, my own family moving west every generation, one step ahead of the law, basically. That's really super oriented toward the American experience. So what's holding people back? Number one is they don't have skills to go someplace else, so that's policy number one. Policy experimentation opportunity number one. Private philanthropy should be engaged in experiments with local government with accountability such that with success it can be scaled to higher levels of government. Human capital development, that's number one. Number two is welfare benefits. It's the shocking thing is the extent to which welfare benefits are not movable across state and county lines. It's unbelievable that, it's great that today compared to 1964 that we have more welfare for people, but the idea that you lose your food stamps, your Section 8 housing, or you lose your disability payments or something when you move across county lines, so you're stuck in a place that has no opportunity, that happens constantly. The third is actual information about opportunity and allowances to help people move. We should actually have state programs to help people move to where the opportunities are in this country so that to get people moving again. So that's one way that experiments at the state and local level and policy. Now, policy ever is only the 5% extrinsic margin of life. My mentor, James Q. Wilson, who was a professor here for decades, he told me that when I was graduating with my PhD in public policy. Son, he said, public policy is never more than 5% important. And the key thing to remember is not to get that 5% in the way of the 95% of how people are actually making decisions in their lives, right? So it's still only 5%, but get that 5% right, and you can really help people a lot.
All right, last question.
Good evening. My name is Fahim Rathor. I'm a second-year master's student here at the Kennedy School. And my question is about, I guess, the intersection of entrepreneurship and religion. Specifically, since in the country right now the largest group is sort of the unaffiliated,
Yeah.
if that trend continues, how does that affect entrepreneurship going forward?
That's a really good question. There's not very much good research that links conventional religious activity to entrepreneurship per se, certainly not causally. So we don't know if you attend a house of worship, a conventional house of worship, whether or not you're more or less entrepreneurial. We do know, however, how a lot of religious activity leads to helps in life satisfaction and sense of meaning. And when people have higher sense of meaning, they tend to be more purposive and more entrepreneurial about their lives. So one of the things I would suggest is, personally, I think that when we work in the cultural space, we're in the Kennedy School of Government, so I strongly reject the idea that we need some sort of Bureau of Middle Class Morals or something where the government would get involved in this. It's actually unconstitutional, but more importantly, I think that this is something that each one of us who's a private citizen should be thinking about. What am I doing to make it easier for people to live transcendently? What am I doing if it's important to you, if written on your heart is specific religious values, I think and you think that this is enriching to your life and enriching to other people's lives, I think that we need a society that draws you out in the same way that you would if you found something really good that was going to help other people. These days, I think that we've privatized the conversation about our religious views to a very large extent and to a very deleterious and dangerous extent. I think that we need enough tolerance in our society and even embracing of the idea of the transcendent so that we want to know what other people's secrets of success actually are. And in so doing, I think that we could create a better, not just more tolerant, a more embracing culture around the things of the heart and the things of the soul. Probably a good way to end it, right?
Ah, great way to end
Thank
it.
you,
So
Leah.
if we could just give a round of applause for that spirited discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming, and have a good afternoon. Thanks again,
Thank you,
Arthur.
Leah. Thank you.